There's a question that has been haunting book lovers, film critics, and frustrated fans over 2 decades now, and it goes something like this. Why can't anyone properly adapt A Wrinkle in Time? It sounds almost absurd when you say it out loud. This is one of the most beloved works of American children's literature. Madeleine L'Engle's 1962 novel has never gone out of print. It won the Newbery Medal. It has been read by generations of children who grew up to press worn copies into the hands of their own kids. It's a story about a brave, imperfect girl who travels across the universe to save her father, and in doing so, discovers that love is the most powerful force in existence. It's got cosmic horror, ancient evil, a planet of conformist nightmare suburbs, and a trio of celestial beings who quote Shakespeare and serve as guides through the fabric of space and time. It has everything. And yet, somehow, the screen adaptations have been, by virtually every measure, failures. Disney has attempted this twice, once in 2003, once in 2018. 2 different eras, 2 different approaches, 2 very different budgets. Both times, the results left audiences cold and critics puzzled. Both times, the feeling was the same. This should not have been this hard. So, what's going on? Is this book simply unfilmable? Is Disney constitutionally incapable of doing it justice? Or is something more systematic at play? A fundamental failure to understand what the book actually is? Let's start with the source material, because that's where this conversation has to begin. A Wrinkle in Time is not simply a book. It never was. When Madeleine L'Engle wrote it, she was rejected by publisher after publisher, reportedly over 26 of them, before it finally found a home. Publishers didn't know what to make of it. Was it a children's book? A science fiction novel? A spiritual allegory? The answer, of course, is that it's all of those things at once. It operates simultaneously on the level of a cosmic adventure story, a coming-of-age character study, and a deeply personal meditation on faith, love, and the nature of good and evil. Meg Murray is one of the great protagonists of 20th century literature precisely because she is so relentlessly, authentically flawed, insecure, stubborn, and angry, and because her arc isn't about becoming someone better, but about accepting who she already is. The book's world building is extraordinary and unusual. The Tesseract, a wrinkle in time that gives the novel its title, is a concept rooted in actual theoretical physics, the idea of folding space to shortcut across the universe. The planet Camazotz is one of the most chilling fictional dystopias ever imagined for a young audience, a world where every person, every house, every bouncing ball moves in perfect and forced synchronicity because the evil intelligence that controls the planet has decided that conformity is happiness. The Black Thing, the embodiment of darkness and evil, wraps itself around planets like a shadow. These aren't just plot devices, they're ideas, big, resonant, philosophically rich ideas. And then there's the nature of the book's internal life. So much of what makes A Wrinkle in Time extraordinary happens inside Meg's head. Her fear, her grief over her missing father, her complicated feelings about her own identity. L'Engle trusted her readers, including young readers, to sit with those feelings, to feel them, to follow Meg through them without having everything explained and simplified. As critics of the adaptations have noted, that trust in the audience is the very thing that both films systematically destroyed. The 2003 television film, produced by Walt Disney Television and directed by John Kent Harrison, arrived first. And to be fair, it was always working at a disadvantage. It was a made-for-TV production, shot on a limited budget, burdened by the kind of visual effects that were already struggling to keep up with the ambitions of the story. But the production problems went deeper than the budget. Critics were quick to identify the central failure of the 2003 version. The film spent all of its energy simplifying. One reviewer described it pointedly as having taken every major location and plot beat from the novel and managed to get absolutely none of it right. The source of its problem, as noted at the time, was that the filmmakers showed no trust in their audience. The film's complexity, the philosophical texture, the spiritual undercurrents, the rich interiority of its characters was stripped away in favor of a more palatable, more digestible version of events. What was left was the skeleton of the story without the soul. Even more damaging was the response from Madeleine L'Engle herself. When asked about the adaptation, she was bracingly direct. she had expected it to be bad, and it was. That is not the kind of quote you want from the author of the book you just adapted. The 2003 film won a Best Feature Film Award at the Toronto Children's Film Festival, which offered a brief moment of encouragement, but the broader reception told the real story. Something had been lost in translation, and the book's most devoted readers knew exactly what it was. If you've made it this far and are enjoying what you've seen and heard, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. 15 years later, Disney came back for another attempt. This time, the resources were dramatically different. The 2018 film, directed by Ava DuVernay, had a production budget of $103 million, making it, notably, the first film with a budget of over $100 million to be directed by an African-American woman. The cast was stacked. Oprah Winfrey as Mrs. Which, Reese Witherspoon as Mrs. Whatsit, Mindy Kaling as Mrs. Who, Chris Pine as the missing father, and Storm Reed as Meg. The visual effects promised to be something extraordinary, and in fairness, the 2018 film is not entirely without merit. Critics acknowledged that it was visually ambitious and it had moments of genuine emotional power, and that Storm Reed's performance as Meg was genuinely a bright spot. Rotten Tomatoes critic consensus acknowledged that the film was visually gorgeous and big-hearted, but it also noted, and this is the key phrase, that it was wildly ambitious to a fault and often less than the sum of its classic parts. The film ended up with a 43% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes and a 53 out of 100 on Metacritic, indicating what critics diplomatically called mixed or average reviews. More telling was the box office. The film grossed approximately $133 million worldwide against a combined production and marketing spend of roughly $250 million. Deadline Hollywood calculated that the film lost Disney around $130 million when all revenue and expenses were accounted for. By any measure, it was one of the biggest bombs of 2018. So what went wrong the second time? The criticisms were different in their specifics, but similar in their underlying concerns. Multiple reviewers felt that the film was so intent on being uplifting, so determined to deliver affirmative, inspirational messages, that it forgot to be a story. One critic described it as a series of affirmations in search of a story, pointing out that the film's attempt to be broad and universal had somehow left it feeling disconnected from anything human. Another noted that after the halfway mark, the audience stopped caring about anyone except Meg, which is a devastating verdict for a story built on the bonds between characters. The villain problem was also widely noted. The It, one of the most genuinely terrifying antagonists in children's literature, was reduced on screen to something that failed to menace, failed to unsettle, failed to function as the existential threat it is in the book. Without a villain that truly frightens, the stakes collapse, and the hero's triumph means nothing. So here's the question that really needs to be asked. Is this Disney's fault specifically, or is A Wrinkle in Time genuinely one of those books that resists adaptations by its very nature? The honest answer is probably both, but more of the former than the latter. Let's address the unfilmable argument first. There are real challenges here that can't be dismissed. The film's greatest strengths, Meg's inner life, the philosophical weight of the themes, the way Madeleine L'Engle uses ideas rather than actions as the primary engine of the story, are all things that cinema struggles with by default. Film is a visual, external medium. It shows. It cannot easily replicate the experience of being inside a character's anxious, grieving, furiously alive mind the way a novel can. The Tesseract as a concept is difficult to render visually without either under-explaining it or turning it into a light show. Camazotz, for all of its horror on the page, risks looking almost quaint on screen. A neighborhood of synchronized children bouncing balls is the kind of image that could slide from disturbing to silly in a heartbeat, depending on how it's handled. These are real problems, but they are not insurmountable problems. Cinema has adapted books far more interior, far more abstract, far more philosophically dense than A Wrinkle in Time, and done it brilliantly. The idea isn't the medium, it's the choices made within the medium. And that brings us back to Disney. What both adaptations share, despite being 15 years apart, despite wildly different budgets, despite different directors and casts, is a tendency to underestimate the audience. The 2003 film dumbed the story down. The 2018 film inflated it into something so relentlessly optimistic and visually overwhelming that it lost its texture. In neither case did the filmmakers seem to fully trust that what makes the books work, its difficulty, its darkness, its genuine philosophical seriousness, was also what would make the film work. This is a Disney problem. It is a pattern we've seen before. Disney tends to sand down the rough edges of the stories it adapts. It tends to prioritize accessibility over complexity, inspiration over ambiguity, spectacle over interiority. For many stories, that approach works fine. For A Wrinkle in Time, a book whose power lies almost entirely in its rough edges, its complexity, its ambiguity, its interiority, it is precisely the wrong instinct. What the book needs is a filmmaker willing to sit in its discomfort, willing to let Camazotz actually be terrifying, willing to let the it be genuinely, philosophically menacing, not just a visual effect, but a presence, the way evil actually feels when you encounter it, seductive, reasonable, quietly totalitarian, willing to let Meg be unlikable in the ways that make her eventual transformation real rather than performed, willing to trust that a 12-year-old in the audience can handle an idea as strange and beautiful as the Tesseract without having it reduced to a talking point. That kind of adaptation requires creative courage. It requires a studio willing to let a filmmaker make something genuinely strange, genuinely uncomfortable, and genuinely true to the source material, even if the result doesn't fit neatly into a marketing campaign. There's a reason this story keeps resonating. The final season of Stranger Things brought it back into the cultural conversation, drawing on its imagery and themes in ways that reminded a whole new generation of viewers what the book was actually about. That's not the kind of staying power you get from a simple story. That's what a real, living, breathing work of literature looks like. One that keeps offering itself up to new interpretations, new contexts, new generations. The book isn't the problem. The book is extraordinary. The problem is a studio that keeps acquiring the rights to a piece of literature it doesn't seem to fully understand, assembling talented people to work on it, and then making the same fundamental mistake both times, mistaking the surface of the story for the story itself. A Wrinkle in Time deserves better. Madeleine L'Engle deserves better. And the readers, the generations of kids who found something of themselves in Meg Murray, who understood what Camazotz was really about, who felt the cold reach of the black thing and the warmth and love that defeated it, they deserve better too. Maybe the third time's the charm. Or maybe what this book actually needs is for Disney to step back and let someone who truly loves it take it somewhere darker, stranger, and more honest than the studio has ever been willing to go. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you think A Wrinkle in Time is genuinely unfilmable, or do you believe the right creative team can finally crack it? And if you could hand this adaptation to any director working today, who would you give it to? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This is 3PC, Past Present Pop Culture. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.